Okay, IBUS 1, test number 1, review, study guide. If you've been following the political discussions on the debates for the Democratic candidates, this issue comes up a lot. NAFTA, Trans-Pacific Partnership, trade agreements. The question is, are they helpful for the working class in this country? Defining working class meaning people that work physically with their hands, manufacturing, those types of issues. Right? Trade unions typically are organizations of those types of workers, so it could be like electricians, plumbers, steel workers, people that put air conditioning systems in, those type of trade unions. And so the question is, auto workers, do trade agreements benefit people in unions, in trade unions? Many unions believe that they do not, that it allows jobs to go to, particularly manufacturing jobs, to go to lower cost environments. Now I'm going to make a couple of key points here. A lower cost environment could be going from a union state like Ohio to a non-union state like South Carolina, because the total cost of labor is lower in South Carolina than it is in union. Now, that's not a trade agreement, that's within the boundaries of the United States. Now when you take in NAFTA or the trade agreements that we have overseas, where you have a labor cost that is 1/10 of what it is in the Midwest, there's a tendency for that product then to get assembled offshore. And that's where the labor unions have difficulty accepting these trade agreements because they think it undercuts their work. The second aspect of trade agreements is whether or not they are beneficial to the overall society and the overall economic well-being. So a case in point is one of my videos. They used to make refrigerators in a place in I believe in Indiana. You have to watch the video, I forget where it was now. And for generations, people would go to work in this plant making refrigerators. Well, you could make those refrigerators in China and Mexico for probably 1/4 the cost. That means that I can go into Best Buy today and buy a refrigerator for 1/4 the cost if it was built in Indiana as the consumer. So I, as a consumer, benefit from that piece of equipment or that appliance that I'm purchasing because I'm paying a significant lower cost because of the productivity gains of getting a lower labor cost. Now the people in Indiana aren't too thrilled about that, and they want to blame the people offshore that are building these. Actually, the blame has to go to the consumers, because the consumers in this country are saying, look, I don't want to have to pay 4 times as much for that refrigerator just so that you can have a job that your grandfather had. Most economists believe that trade agreements are great for the overall economy. They may not be perfect for a particular sector of the workforce, but they generate what we call comparative advantage. They generate growth in all societies based on what your natural strengths are. And our natural strengths today are less about physical labor and more about cognitive labor, thinking processes, design, that type of stuff. And where other developing countries are moving from agricultural labor to manufacturing labor, it's a growth for them as well. So the question is, if I take those two issues we just talked about, are you as the consumer prepared to pay 4 times as much for a product so that low-skill labor at a much higher cost makes your refrigerator? That's really the question. Which of the following is not a characteristic of globalization? That's a great question. Okay, so back in mid-60s, close to 1970, when I was just getting out of the Merchant Marine Academy, we were all trained on ships that didn't have containers, because when we were in school, 64 through 68, there were no container ships. Today there are, and that economic advantage of being able to containerize freight and lower the overall cost of transport, particularly international transport, has had a huge implication on lowering the cost of transportation. And one of our charts that we have on there, the 1, 2, 3, 4 chart, I think we talked about before, it's better to be in a good market than it is to be a good operator, because you can always improve your operation, but you can't cause a market to get better. The market finds its own point of equilibrium. And so what you're trying to do when you're dealing with any particular market, so as an example, you as a student are my market. What are we doing to create what we call utility for you, the student? One of the things that we've learned is students don't necessarily want to have to sit down in front of a computer. So we've taken all our course content, we've made it mobile ready, so you can scroll it up on your phone, you could be sitting on a bus, you could be at the beach, you could be at the bar, you could be anywhere and still be able to find out what do I have to get done and do that. Okay? And so that's called creating utility. As I talked to you before about these 1, 2, 3, 4, that it's the most important thing is to be in a market that's growing. A great example, we have a lot more people signing up for our online courses than we do for the same course face-to-face. Why? Because it's easier for them, right? They don't have to get in the car. Okay. One of the things that we have in our envelope is the single most important thing in business, in our view, is what we call Patrick's Law, which is named after one of my Golden West students some years ago. It's basically revenue certainty. If you have a business and you can create revenue certainty, you can then create and sustain that business over a period of time. This is a good question. One of the things that I talk to businesses about on a regular basis is when they're recruiting and or interviewing students, that they're coming into the workplace without the equipped skills in order to hit the deck running, to actually be able to do work right away. And we talk to this with our interns all the time, about learning the skills that are valuable in the workplace, which generally speaking aren't taught in the academic setting. And so one of the points I make to them is, you can get a passing grade in my academic class, but you would never remain in our employ if your performance is that level in our workplace. So one of the things that we talk about, the reason we give an envelope out in our face-to-face classes, is all business ideas. If you watch Shark Tank or any of these entrepreneur shows, most good ideas you can quantify down to a single transaction on the back of a cocktail napkin or an envelope. Now it's a little hard to carry around cocktail napkins in your suit pocket, so we carry envelopes. And so we're sitting down doing mergers or acquisitions or trying to understand whether it's a viable business. We sit there and try to figure it out to get it to fit on the back of an envelope. One of the important things that we talk about, as I talked about earlier, is in our entrepreneur class, we emphasize that you really need to have your business mobile ready, because 80% of the population very shortly is going to have a cell phone or a smartphone in their hand, and that's how they choose to want to operate. I rarely sit down at a computer anymore to read emails. I was at Costco today as an example, and the lady in front of me decided that she wanted to get a big pile of stuff, put it up on the thing, and not have the right card in order to shop at Costco. And so there's like people behind me, people around me. Now, I used to get aggravated about this stuff, so all I did was, hey, I'm going to have to stand here for 10 minutes while they get the manager. I simply take my phone out and I scroll through and read my emails. I talked to you earlier about, watching the Democratic debates and paying attention to politics. Global politics today affects our economy. Our economy affects you and your career and job opportunities. All business, in my view, is international business. There's very few transactions anymore that there isn't some international element to it. And if, as an example, in my son's business, he has a project where he's importing salt for Walmart. And he made the contract with Walmart based on one price point, and then the current administration decides that they want to put a 25% import tax on salt. He's now underwater on that transaction. Not happy about it either. If you read my CV, you'll see what my background is. It makes questions about that. There's this concept going on today that we can operate in this country in isolation and not be part of the international community, the international business community, or the consumer community. That's a false understanding. One of the biggest problems that we find, particularly with more seasoned, I don't want to use the term older, but more seasoned workers, right, is when there's a change in the business environment and we try to get people to adjust to the changes in the requirement, people get pretty set in their ways and says, well, I've been doing it this way for 10 years. One of the reasons I love hiring college students is they're used to adapting. They go to a different class, content changes, they learn quickly, right? And what we're interested in is what is happening today. What do we need to be doing today to move these products forward? This is another great point from our entrepreneur class. Several years ago, I had a young girl who made these amazing cakes, right? Casey Jane's cakes, right? And we were talking about how these things were really fantastic, right? And so I said to her one day, you know, what would you charge for that? And she started the conversation by saying, well, this is how many hours I put in, and I want to get paid this much an hour. And I kind of put my hands up and said, stop. What I'm willing to pay for that has nothing to do with how much time it takes you and how much you want to pay yourself. It's what my other alternatives are to get that great cake, right? And so, in fact, I'll show you a great example here. One of my students made this bracket for me, this piece of jewelry for me. See that right there? It's like, I have a little thing in there that has my nitroglycerin in it, and it doesn't look very good. And so she made this for me in my last entrepreneur class. And when we discussed again how much was she going to charge me for this, we started out with how many hours, and I said, no. The question is, how much value is that to me? So there's not a direct connection between cost and price. It's what the market is willing to bear. Okay, that's it for this test.